Let's go, y'all. How's it going? Hanging out, I hope. I'm good. Just checked on my neighbors. They're doing pretty well, too. Just cold. Hopefully, nothing more than that. I'm sad that some of my trees in the back looked like they got hit pretty hard. Fell over, but we're doing well here. Welcome to this week. We're doing a Thursday stream this week. We're calling it the Storm Stream. Hope that you are nice and warm wherever you are, and solidarity to our friends in Tennessee who actually seem to be getting the worst of it right now. How's it going? I was thinking about hanging out for a little bit. I got some chili on the stove that I'm waiting to simmer, so I got a little bit of time. We'll be looking at questions and things like that from the chat. Last night was a hell of a lot of fun. We had Matt Bender on to talk about the scam economy. Why Web3 and crypto are not your friends, and really just aren't a part of any kind of movement towards justice or emancipation to push back against the most delusional folks out there. But yeah, and then we got a bonus episode coming up this weekend, so check that out, patrons. I highly suggest, if you haven't, I'll put another teaser up after the stream, but if you haven't already checked out the conversation that we had with our friend Bird about the politics of science, I highly suggest you go and check that out. That's up for patrons right now on Sunday, and hopefully we'll be able to release that sometime in the near future to folks. But it's a great reason to up your subscription to us. And I think we have some more things coming down the pipeline for patrons that we'll be announcing pretty soon. But how's it going? Let me see what folks are getting into in the chat today. We're on Rockfin. We're on Twitch. So let's go. Yeah, definitely check out our conversation there. Let me see. Yeah, me too. I have good neighbors. Yeah, it's not too bad. I mean, from what we're seeing, tomorrow is supposed to be the big day. I mean, I know the power, there was a pretty significant jump in the power supply here this morning when it's a lot colder. It's a little bit warmer now, at least in Austin where I'm at. But tomorrow I think is going to be the worst of it. But I don't think it's looking like we're going to be hit as bad as last year, thank God. But that doesn't mean that the failure of this government to fix the grid is no less important. And it might be worthwhile just taking a second, and I'm looking at the chat too for questions from y'all. But some things are really frustrating about that entire conversation that happened after the after the the horrible winter storm last year that led to people's deaths. And apart from like the kind of physical and property damage and things like that people experience, I mean, really put people through it. I mean, here I've been hearing stories and heard stories from my mother of just like simple acts of giving people food during that period of time when everyone's refrigerators were shut down. People were having a hard time being able to get out of the house. Just giving people a box of cheeses or something like that, being really, really meaningful because people just were not prepared and the government really failed to provide for folks. And it's frustrating that out of that, we haven't seen really any significant response when it comes to, weatherizing, the grid. Like there's some symbolic bills that went through the ledge here, but they all had carve outs for the natural gas industry, saying that, basically, they could put off weatherizing for a significant amount of time. And even then, the enforcement mechanisms on these things are so weak that, we're nowhere near where we need to be. And obviously where we need to be is publicly controlled power. And Texas is a pretty exceptional mess because it's so marketized and privatized compared to even other states. But hell, even in states like California, it's an absolute nightmare. And, it's one of those things that's been a big part of the show is making that argument that we need to have public power, because not just public power, but control over our water. I mean, as MLK said, it starts to be ridiculous when you realize that in a world that's mostly water, that people have to pay a water bill. And I think these are these kind of basic bread and butter demands that that we some basic kind of bread and butter demands that we as socialists need to get better at making. Um, well, let me see. So we got some. Also, I finished a conversation just a second ago with Andrew Harrison, who's running for Justice of the Peace here in the Austin area, and it was a really great conversation. We try not to do too many candidate interviews on this show, not because we think that local politics is not important, but we're trying to walk that fine line here. But I think, when it comes to talking Democratic Socialists, we're very happy to talk to them. And Andrew was a really great interview. One, because I think the campaign's looking good and has a good chance of winning. But he had a very radical and progressive and social sense of how we can use things like local power to win victories. For our movement and for our people. And that position is a position that essentially is an elected official that operates in the capacity of the justice system. So this is somebody who sees people in small claims court. This is somebody who sees people in eviction court. This is somebody who sees, children and students for things like truancy, right? Where we know how the state interacts with people in those cases. It throws the book at them, and that's the school to prison pipeline. That's absolutely callous and needless evictions, right? Seeing a different way of how we interact with the state and the justice system when we're having working class people, working class candidates holding those positions instead of the typical kind of careerist politicians who are using it as a stepping stone in their legal and judicial career, is absolutely something that's really beneficial. And I'm really looking forward to. We'll be releasing that conversation next Wednesday. But I highly suggest people check out that campaign, because I'm just leaving that interview right now and feeling very inspired. Um, and we're seeing, and I'm going to get to these questions, and because I wanted to bring that up because it was a really important conversation, and a reminder of how these kind of fights really make a big difference. Not just for our movement and like organizations like the DSA, but also for a class. Because again, if you've ever had any interactions with the justice system in this country, you've probably walked away very disappointed. And staffing those agencies and those arms of the government and of our justice system with friendly people who are looking out for the interests of working class people in the long run, I think it's something that's very helpful. And the server dislike says, I'm hoping to see DSA start a needed separation for the Democratic Party, as the D's flavor of electoral level failures. It's a non-starter for even the most minuscule reform. And I've done a lot on this tension. I'm one of those people who I find the Democratic Party to absolutely be an organization, an institution that stands in the way of progress, and it is an organization that we certainly should oppose. I'm not one of those people who has this kind of like holy kind of Christian theology version of like thinking of the Democratic Party in the sense is like, oh, you've been tainted by the sin of having a D by your name running in a local election. I think strategic use of ballot lines can be extremely beneficial. But I've always argued that I think it's really clear now, especially, that there needs to be a, a rhetorical distance for folks in power. Like, it's not helpful for our movement when people associate our elected officials with the Democratic Party instead of our organizations, right? Our socialist organizations. And I think it's difficult to be able to build up that capacity because like that's media apparatus, that's more that's like having a stronger entryway into like the general conversations in this country instead of the kind of pockets where a lot of socialist organizing is happening right now. um, and so it's one of those things that it's not just like, oh, you flip the script and like, oh, here's like a new messaging campaign that's going to change everything. But I think it needs to be a very conscious effort by us, and our organizations in particular, our electeds going forward. And I don't think being combative for just the sake of being a little rambunctious is the answer either. But I do think it's not helpful, for people to, for example, see us as potentially, in alliance with the Pelosi's and the Schumers out there. I would note, though, for folks that, you know, this is something that you experience as you do more like organizing and I don't know, spend a little bit more time on the left, is that, there's this kind of argument that I think a lot of people have, or belief that a lot of people have, is that like the vast majority of people in this country are just asleep and they don't understand things. And if they just heard like the right argument, or something like that, then like we'd be sort of living in like the pre-socialist times or something like that, and in the sense of like we're very close to some kind of revolution or something like that. Unfortunately, that's not really the case. People recognize that their bosses are assholes. They just don't think that there's a horizon that we're able to cross. And one of the difficult parts of the socialist movement that we're finding ourselves in right now is the need to build power, while not letting ourselves sort of be co-opted into refurbishing or like fixing the PR problems of the Democratic Party, um, while also starting to convince people that like we can deliver for them, and that takes a little bit of a difficult dance to one foot in, one foot out kind of thing. And I don't think that we've seen a really perfect example of that so far, with especially congressional representatives. But that's the kind of model in the short term that we need to be running. And then, of course, with the goal of eventually being able to break from the Democratic Party completely. I'm very supportive, for example, of people who just run on their own socialist ballot line. I think if you have the capacity and the capability of doing that, I find that to be extremely helpful. I just don't think just sort of like an outside of analyzing your local and material conditions, like in the races and spaces that are available to you, having some kind of pre-written rule that like will never run on a Democratic Party ballot line. I think that would be a big hindrance to the movement. But I'm very much like in the spirit of like what we're trying to achieve by saying step outside that party. I definitely agree with that. I'm just going to go down these lists here. Last year, our friend Emo Dragon says, last year I was in the supply chain for a chemical company that had a plant in Freeport and a terminal in Houston. Lines were depended on to distribute caustic soda froze, and it was a nightmare. Thankfully, I'm in cybersecurity now. Man, I can't imagine what that would have been like. Man, Lord. Um, Kowalski, I got your shirt. I should wear it on the next stream. Thanks for it. I got my Kowalski Family Farm shirt in the mail. But he says Nebraska's power grid became a lot stronger after the ice storms of '07. A lot of federal funds to rebuild broken poles and line. Yeah, and that's the thing. Is like there could be a lot more done here, but the problem is that there's too many interests. In one, like the thing with the Texas grid in particular is that it's so committed to the idea of competition for like competition's sake, that it's not efficient. I mean, I make this point, maybe something that might be a little bit easier for people's heads to wrap around than like the electric infrastructure. Like underneath my house right now, there are a bunch of different fiber optic cables, so that I can have choice between a few different companies that are all vying, for my dollars. When what would make more sense on an infrastructure level would be to improve the lines that we have, and expand them. Electricity functions a lot in the same way here. We have all these competing forces that doesn't necessarily create better electric, um, it doesn't create like a better infrastructure for us. It might provide some people with more options, but the people who live in the decentralized parts of Texas, right? The parts like Austin still is Austin. Like we still have public power in the sense of like most other places in the country. But for a lot of people, they live in these kind of decentralized areas where they have to pick their provider, and those people got really screwed by this system. And we haven't really seen that much in terms of um, cost benefit to people, for the system. So, I mean, it's a shame that we couldn't have learned like Nebraska did in '07. And the reason for that is because there's an insane amount of competition internally within the grid. Um, I wish I could, but it's somewhere else. Also, chili looks nasty when it's cooking, man. I mean, it's good and smells nice, but that's not really. You don't take pictures of that. Um, um, Micah says, "Do you know the island of evil Doctor Fidel Castro rent is limited to a max of 10% of income, and electricity is subsidized to 1% of income? How awful for capitalists! Boo-hoo." Yeah, I mean, there's just the fact is that there are other models out there for housing. I'm very much a supporter of social housing. I think that that is a really solid basis for moving forward. I think it's something that the system, as it even exists now, could accept. But it's pretty amazing to see people acting like, oh, well, this is just the way it is. There's no other kind of models out there, and there certainly are a lot of better. Um, Let me see. I'm just going to go down. Emo Dragon says, "What's your position on potential Ukraine conflict? I feel like I'm not well educated, but I don't want war, and I don't want people suffering from harsh sanctions. I think that then you're starting in the right place." Um, well, I think it's tough because we got really great guests lined up for the next few weeks, so it's hard to do like a you know to move everything around to do a whole episode on it, but I have been a little frustrated by seeing some of the responses from people on the left here. I mean, look, if you're an American leftist, in particular, American socialist, like we have a very, very proud tradition, actually, of opposing American imperialist adventures abroad. And this goes all the way back to Eugene Debs. I mean, Eugene Debs, we talk about him being in prison, but what was he in prison for? He was imprisoned for World War One. For his opposition to World War One. And there were certainly arguments you could make about expansion of certain powers in Europe at that period of time, and like why the United States really, really needs to get involved. But Eugene Debs had the correct analysis there that these are games of grand imperial powers, right? These are games of the bourgeoisie. These are games of the rich and the powerful, and the people who are made to suffer are the working class. And I think. By that, like they're the soldiers or the people who suffer from the bombings and the destruction to their homeland, etc. Like, being anti-war is a very, very deep socialist position. I think sometimes people tie themselves into knots because they think that you have to. By saying you oppose conflict means that you're, supporting all sides or something like that, which is a very, very, dangerous kind of rhetorical trap to lock yourself into. And I don't think it's an accident that a lot of Americans think that way. Because, like, think about it. It's like, it was the rebels in Libya, right? And that's why we needed to go in and kill Gaddafi, right? It was, the people of Iraq suffering under a dictatorship there, and that's why we need to go in and invade. And Afghanistan, the list can go on and on and on and on, right? There are horrible regimes and systems out there, but the idea that America is going to sort of swoop in and save the day is ludicrous, right? That's just general principles. To what's happening right now, I think a lot of people make the mistake of just because Putin's on the other side of the American war machine, sort of valorizing him. Putin is an authoritarian right wing dictator who certainly has designs on increasing his power, because domestically he has completely shut down democratic society to such an extent. The only way that he can maintain himself in the public eye is by maintaining an image of an extremely powerful and influential character. And I think that it would be a mistake to also look at what's going on in Russia, Ukraine solely on like the psychology of one individual. But it's just worth noting that, and I'll just say it on the record, because a lot of people get so worked up when you say you oppose war because they think that you're supporting Putin by some kind of weird I don't know, flip around. But what's happening right now, the nuts and bolts of it is that um, Putin is trying to make a move to prevent further expansion of NATO, and particularly Western influence in the areas that he deems part of his backyard, part of the old Soviet Union. So he's trying to flex his muscle. I think that it's really notable to see how the American and the British media have been reporting on this versus what we're hearing from people even in the Ukrainian government, right? But we're saying that like all of these talks that we're about to be at war are completely overblown. And that's just the facts. And you don't have to. These are the kind of things where it's much more useful actually to read like military press, people who cover strategy. Um, in general, because they'll tell you, if you read most of those publications, they're saying right now that like no, there is no significant preparation, or no signs that what's going on the border right now symbolizes some kind of willingness or capability, logistically, for a grand invasion of Ukraine. Like that's just not on the table right now. And I think it's really unhelpful to start any of these conversations by acting as if that's what is happening, because the people who are benefiting from that are American warmongers, are people who want to increase domestic support for American expansion and expansion of influence across the Eastern Europe. Well, I just think it's really, really worthwhile to get there, to put that out up at the front, because a lot of people, they get really, really hysterical, saying that like we're sitting here and we're at a moment right now where Hitler is about to invade Poland, right? It's like we are nowhere near that kind of moment right now, and yeah, you do yourself a big disservice by believing that and getting yourself to such a state, where you think that that's happening. That being said, is there certainly like a potential for the increasing of tensions that we've been seeing on the border to end in suffering and death for people? Absolutely. So that's why the principled position right here is to support de-escalation, 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 especially as an American, right? And even across NATO and Western European powers, there is already a lot of fragmentation where the Americans and the British are really pushing this kind of narrative, right, and wanting to increase the amount of troops and the amount of support troops, and the amount of weapons that they're funneling into Ukraine, right? When you're seeing countries like Germany saying we need to cool it, that shows that this kind of thing, this moment that some people feel like that we're at right now, where this is the grand fight for democracy versus authoritarianism, is BS. And I'll just say this: I think that it would be, I would certainly oppose in principle. Not saying that I would support American intervention on it. I would oppose in principle any kind of serious, military intervention from Russia into Ukraine. But I would also, warn people that the kind of glowing, the way that the current Ukrainian state is talked about in the West, is it's pretty fantastical. You can't look at what's been going on in that country since 2014 and start talking about it as some kind of model or beacon of democracy. That doesn't mean that that doesn't justify Russia's bellicosity toward it or anything like that. But it's just like the narrative that you're getting. There's a picture that's being painted in people's head that there is just this small country that's trying to be free from a horrible dictator, and he's just going to cross over the border, when the fact of the matter is that Ukraine is caught in between two massive powers, Russia and the United States through the arm of NATO. And it is sitting in the crossroads of these two systems, right? These two powerful nations. And they are putting, the United States and Russia are putting the people of Ukraine at risk because of this. And you shouldn't fall for these kind of false narratives that are painting American intervention and American, and the increase of like American hostilities there as something that's good. I would also note that in a country like Ukraine, you have to be worried about even things like what they're calling the lethal aid going into the country, because if you start pumping a lot of weapons into a country, that is having crisis, not just at the sense of the border of Russia, but internally as well, as there's been a growing, very militant far right neo-Nazi movement. Pumping the country filled with weapons from the West is not a positive solution to this thing. The only solution here is de-escalation, 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 and there's a lot that I'm like having to gloss over here, but I think like if that were to be, my 2 minute off the cuff talk on it, that's where I would say. I would also note, that after 1990, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Americans were extremely involved in Russian internal affairs, right? It's rich when you hear all these people talking about Russian interfering in our elections. We actually did that there, and we did that to suppress any kind of left movement or continuation of the Communist Party coming into power there, right? Like all of those bad presidents that you think of Russia in the 90s, this massive movement of privatization and the increase of oligarchy in that system, that was American sponsored. So what is Putin? Putin was an alternative to Yeltsin, right? He wasn't America's boy, but he was created by the conditions that the Americans put onto Russia because America really wanted to rub their former adversaries' nose and shit, right? And they wanted to humiliate them. And you've seen that both what they did internally in Russia, but also the expansion of American power eastward. Um, and that's what a lot of this conflict today is about. But they created this crisis within Russia, um, wherein the opposition had to become was always going to be a strong man and an authoritarian like Putin, right? Because you are actively trying to depoliticize civil society. If you're the American intelligence, right? They're actively trying um, to like destroy Russian civil society and early forms of democracy in that country to such an extent that it only increases the ability of fragmented oligarchs and characters to be able to secure large amounts of power for themselves, and then eventually somebody is going to be able to secure enough support from those characters and those people to sort of put themselves on the top of society. I mean, Putin's now effectively is president for life. um, and so the point is that, like, when people, I get frustrated because a lot of people will go and they'll talk about how authoritarian Putin is, which is not incorrect, but like it starts in like 2010 for them, right? Instead of being this long process that was put into place by the conditions of American hubris and also American business interest in trying to see how much of that society could be sort of gobbled up by a few folks. Because what happens with the rich? What do the rich people in Russia do with the money that they have? What do the oligarchs do with the money that they have? They recycle that money and they bring it back into America and into the United Kingdom. London is a great example of this, where you see just Russian oligarchs, pumping the country, putting all of the money that they're taking from Russia and putting it into London in real estate and financial assets, etc. Right? So you see this ruling class of Russia becoming very, very much implanting itself very much, particularly in the United Kingdom, but also in the United States. Right? Like the point is that there's a really, really deep history here, and to understand the kind of larger imperial games here, you have to understand that history, or you just fall into these kind of really simplistic narratives that aren't reflective of the reality on the ground, so that you're getting yourself into this kind of mouth foaming moment where you're talking like we're sitting here before Hitler invaded Poland, and oh, you want to say that we're not doing anything. That's not the moment that we're in. And if you don't educate yourself on that history, even if it's broad strokes like that, you're going to fall into some traps. But I'd be more than happy to talk to do something in the future with some people who really spend most of their time studying this. But you asked what my position in general is, and that's it. Um, let's see, we might get some big ones today. um, what are the top 5 social demands? I think is there a way that I can save this? I'm going to pin that message and come back to it because I have a feeling that people probably were commenting on what I was just saying, um, and I want to make sure that we don't have to just go back and forth forever. Um, yeah, I mean that's like the quick and easy version of it, essentially, right? Um, and I think that's why I've been so frustrated by this moment that we've been going through. All right. Well, I'll go back up to the top then, and I'll come in. I don't. This is going to get lost if I do this. So let me see. What are your top five social demands? What do you think the public mind could take so many issues at a time due to limited emotional focus? Like I noticed the more that at an issue, I mean, off the top of my head, I think it's healthcare, housing, wages, anti-war, and feelings of equity. People feel very alienated in our society, and ways that we can, you know, point out that you feel sort of left out of certain things in our society, and successes and the kind of fruits of this society, and not because of your lack of ability, um, but because there's a system that's sort of designed to keep you out. And what do I mean by that? It's like things like student loans and like the higher education system in this country. We're seeing the limit of that. Like the argument before was like, oh well, we only let this kind of social class, this upper middle class, ruling class in the society enjoy these fruits because they're smarter than y'all. They went to college and they got these degrees. You see a mass return of large parts of the population into these 4-year university programs. The university programs capture us all in this massive debt trap. I mean, then people don't have the jobs on the other side, right? So that feeling of alienation, I think, is very helpful. But healthcare, everybody recognizes our healthcare system's broken, um, and to talk about that, you have to talk about about forms of socialism, right? This is like the kind of crux of all of the big social demands. I think we as socialists should be making. Two. What I say, housing is something that everybody's experiencing right now. I did a whole video on is public housing the next Medicare for all. I think putting that vision forward to people, something that most people can understand. It might seem a little out of the ordinary for American politics, but I think it's something that people want. They want to be able to live in their communities. They want their neighbors to be able to live in their communities, and we can present a solution that also addresses the fundamental function of capitalism. Shoot, I said anti-war. I think that's obvious. I think that's just like a crucial position that socialists should be having. And Lord, I'm sorry, I forgot the fourth. But if those were just off the top of my head, that's where I would go. But I think rather than having that list, it's saying you have to find what issues are speaking to people in your community, and then finding ways to attach those issues to the fundamental class struggle that we're experiencing, right? So I think rather than coming up with a list that's going to be perfect for everyone in every situation, it's recognizing what are people in your community worked up about, rightfully so, and how can we relate that to our kind of larger project of building working class power and socialism. And you'll find more often than not that it's you'll be able to do that. Um, yeah, and this is what I was saying basically, but I think that was before I went on it. Um, okay, I'm just going down. Okay, let me see. If you throw in these question marks at the end of your things, so I just don't have to read walls of text, that's always very helpful too. Um, just saying, because sometimes y'all are talking to each other and sometimes they're question. Um, oh, we got some stuff going on about the Catholic Church in here. It sounds a little interesting. Let's see. Yeah, I think this is a good point. I think most people agree with this. Like, I don't consider it possible to live a good life if the neighborhood you live in there is abject poverty, since it creates a sense of disillusionment with the finiteness of the material. I mean that, and also I think human beings are naturally empathetic. I said this a while ago that like sometimes people on the left think that we're the only ones who like experience these emotions. People on the right. Um, Donald Trump ran a whole campaign where he was talking about love. This is a campaign about love, and obviously it wasn't. But like, there are these kind of basic human emotional appeals that we're all very, open to, and I think I think that gives should give you a lot of hope in politics, in our ability to do something different. But I also think it's a reminder too about like how starting to get material about things is also really critical so that we have longevity. Like, um, there's a really great video footage of Chairman Fred Hampton talking about um, education and action. And in it, he talks about the proposal was, it doesn't really matter for the example, but the proposal was to build a public bank. And he gets very upset with the other members of the Black Panther party who are proposing it to him because he's upset because there's not an education bit at the top of the proposal. And, they say, well, we didn't put that in. And he explains to them that the reason you have to do the education is that even if something is like right and you convince people to do it, if they don't understand why we're doing it, and the fact that, like in the case of a public bank, like if you don't recognize that the public bank is like our social power, our ability to fund each other, our ability to make sure that we can sort of unplug ourselves from a financial system that is excluding us and taking advantage of us, talking about, being a Black person in Chicago at that period of time. Not that it's any better now. What you're going to end up seeing is people are going to be taking money off of the top of the bank. They'll be stealing from the bank, right? Like if you don't understand what these things are and what they represent, then we can have all these successes and even have things that are thriving that we're going to undermine because of our own kind of political ignorance. And understanding that the education role, the material role, in addition to the kind of like emotional spiritual energy that we can build into our politics, that material understanding and that education as a part of our project is really, really crucial. I think that that's one thing that is sort of missing in the post-Bernie era. I don't think that we did enough political education as to why we were doing what we're doing, and I think that's left a lot of people sort of lost. And I think that's something that's really important for us to include in our projects, going forward. Um, hmm. Airlines. Thank you, Michael, for the chat. He says, airlines don't make money on flying people around. Is there viability in using eminent domain to build high-speed trains across the continent instead? Um, I'm not sure. I get what you mean. Are you saying like there's the profitability of airlines is low, or but to your second question, I mean, I think that using public funds and public abilities to to purchase and build high speed rail is something that we desperately need in this country. Not only just because of the climate crisis, but also social mobility and the ability to be able to move around this country. I mean, you know I've been lucky to have been able to spend a lot of my time um, across the country, particularly across the South, and I used a car for that. Um, but a lot of people, they don't have that kind of freedom of movement, and the way the airline systems work and the cost is extremely prohibitive. So I think there's a climate argument, obviously, with high speed rail, but a social one too. Like I want people to be able to see this country and to be able to have relationships from people from Birmingham to Los Angeles, right? And I don't want that just to be a privilege or experience of the super wealthy. As the fun, I mean, like I'm not in love with eminent domain, in the sense of just seizing things. That has unfortunately a pretty rough history in this country. But I certainly would support, using public monies to be able to, purchase and design, efficient routes. But apologies if I wasn't able to get your answer here. Um, I'm very, and this is going back to Ukraine, I believe. I'm very dismayed how so many people just treat the U.S. getting involved in conflict as common sense. I do too. I mean, I gotta say, I have been a bit surprised to see how um, popular. I would say that the vast majority of people recognize that American intervention in Ukraine. One is like I just want to reiterate again, like we are not even in a situation where that is viable. We are not in a moment. There are hostilities, and what is happening at the border is no doubt about it, a provocation. But I think that some people read that and in their head they think, you know, invasion imminent. That's not the case right now, and that's really important to understand because the kind of ticking time bomb mentality that some people have around this, I think, also plays into that kind of thing. Um, but I would also argue that I think a lot of folks, um, dis- like everyone's anti-war in the past, right? But it's a little bit more difficult in the present. And I think even thinking like, what should the American response be a border crisis between Russia and Ukraine? I think plays into some of like the worst kind of imperial fantasies that a lot of Americans have. Even people consider themselves to be on the left. That like America. Is somehow the order keeper of the world. I think that's a very, very dangerous mentality to have. Um, Funny. I think. I hope. I apologize if I'm missing any questions. The chat's sort of jumping around on me. Um, I'm no. All those things like at least the ones I see on the internet, they all basically are like, well, this person is the leader of a country, so they control the net worth of the country, which is ridiculous. I mean, Putin is certainly taken care of, but I think that that'd be a funny way to categorize that. Um, um, it's absolutely insane how. I mean, I remember like in 2008, Obama talking about rail, and we have 12 years of nothing happening with that. Meanwhile, China has produced and constructed an extremely efficient and impressive high speed rail system. It's unbelievable that we're unable to do something like that in 2022. But we've lost the capacity as a country to be able to develop like that. Look at what the hell's happening with infrastructure. They are going to twiddle their thumbs forever on it. And Biden and his successors will continue giving speeches outside of Pittsburgh as people are falling into the river, because our bridge system is completely, in this country is in chaos. Right? That's imperial decline. The functions of the state, we've lost the ability to run it internally, especially if it's to the benefit of the vast majority of people. That's a very worrying thing, because that also means on our end we come into um, we come into power, and we have to actually like recreate the capacity of the state to be able to to be able to do basic kind of services and things like that. It's incredible. Um, all right. Dude, I don't know what your beef with the Catholic Church is, but I can't answer the get worked up about it, I must say. I think these might be older, but we can keep going. Kowalski says, "Isn't Ukraine Russia great power maneuvering like Ukraine playing the West and the East off one another for concessions? Makes a lot of sense." I also think it's not helpful to talk about Ukraine as a unified thing, right? The current government of Ukraine is certainly very West looking, and that is a big part of their platform. So it's great power in the international sense, and it's internal power. I mean, that's why I think the kind of like flippant emotional discourse that is really prevalent amongst people who want American troops on the ground um, is really really unhelpful. Um, all right, I think I'm getting down. I'm just gonna zoom to the bottom. Sorry, y'all, um, and come up. Lord, I can't see any more about the Vatican. I'm sorry, Vatican. No Vatican chat in here. Um, Lord. Okay, here we go. Michael says, I guess the important question becomes, how could we update eminent domain laws wording to avoid fucking over inconveniencing poor people rather than rich. I mean, are you talking about like you just want to seize land from like small landowners or from large landowners? I'll just tell you logistically, any kind of situation where, um, we're doing that, like like if you're just looking to build a rail line upon which parts of the rail, if you're looking to connect, for example, I don't know, DC to Los Angeles, and the way that you're trying to draw the route is to see who, what people own are rich who own land, you're going to run into a pretty serious infrastructure and logistical problem there. The solution has to be, that we can put some weight behind it, but you're going to have to compensate people unless we are in a moment, where we're under some kind of proletarian government. But any kind of like transitionary period, like you're going to have to compensate people, and I don't think that that'd be too damaging. I think I'd be much more worried. And I think, as your question points out, about making sure that poor and working class communities aren't sort of bulldozed over to create something like that. Because that'd be my main concern. But um, I think that this is just something that we can win together as a society that can be really helpful. Um, we love trains here. Everyone loves trains. It's sad that I can't take any good. It's hard for me to do train lines around here. We're trying to build what they call the Texas Triangle, but I think that'd be very very helpful. Um, Between Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston, that'd be massive if we could build that, and it would keep people off those pretty country roads that I love so much, away from the old ranch and stuff I grew up on. Um, Yes, in the sense of like if you're confiscating land and you're just like, and you have some kind of bureaucratic program where you're saying like, okay, well, is this group of people politically and ethically okay for us to just seize the land from them? Um, that's just like that's an incredible burden to put onto the project. I think you could put some state weight behind it, if you're needing to encourage some kind of wealthy landowner who might be standing in the middle of the project. I'd 100% support that. I just think as a principle, like you can compensate people for their land, make it fair, and build these railways. We have the capacity to do that, and I think um, that'd be a very like if your goal is to redistribute power, money, and land in this society, I think a kind of like arbitrary line going through some people's property where we're forcing them to give up specific parts of it is a very inefficient way. So like if the goal is to be seizing land from the super wealthy, I think you should just seize land from the super wealthy in some kind of hypothetical state. I'm just saying, like I think that it's the context obviously matters a lot. And I don't find it to like be an important add in to a national railway project. Um, let's see. Um, yeah, I don't understand the Catholic. I missed the beginning of the Catholic Church stuff, so I have no idea what's going on. Um, we haven't done enough on Peru, and we definitely should. There's been a lot of developments there, and it's been sort of up and down. But we should get some folks on to talk about that soon too. Um, I'm almost interested to know what the Vatican stuff is, but I'm not gonna. I can't do this right now. Um, okay, I missed this. Billy asked you earlier what was Stalin's greatest mistake. I mean, um, for Stalin or for the. I mean, Stalin ossified a dynamic system by force. The most general thing is what was his greatest mistake was like ending the radical revolution of the Soviet Union. Leo Panich has a line about the end of the Soviet Union where he says, the system made people into fools. And it's not that they were fools themselves, is that the system like denied them their capacity to participate in the state and in a kind of democratic project, in a way that you would want, kind of social system to develop. Stalin and there's a lot to go on with Stalin, and I don't want people to misunderstand me here. Um, but effectively, what happens, with Stalin is you have a state that certainly is under threat, certainly unstable, and there's no doubt about it. I just think it's worthwhile to mention that, like, there were, foreign and counter-revolutionary elements trying to undermine the system from within. But what Stalin does in this situation is not to increase democracy and to um, increase workers' power, but rather to ossify and to sort of sit tight on top of the state apparatus and the gains of the revolution. And I don't know what the hope is. You might think that it was it was that this was the best. In their minds, they would probably think that this is the best way to prevent any kind of chaos that could upend the system. But once you do that, you also kill, like, the revolutionary energy of the society. So the second that he starts ossifying the state apparatus, that's a major mistake. And you can see that when they make the transition to socialism in one country. You can see that when he undermines the radical gains that women experienced in the early days of the Soviet Union. Right? I mean, the turn away from the radical energies of the of the Russian Revolution in favor of a kind of like ossify. As long as we're the people in charge, that's victory. That's that's where I would start. Um, it, is it just me, or is the left discourse woefully degenerated in the last year or so? Um, I would say so. And I think it's because a lot of people don't disagree on what a kind of positive project would look like. I mean, the Bernie campaign, I think, really brought a lot of people together. And I think um, there are different camps, and I don't think it's worthwhile to put it all in one group or the other. But I think that there has been a lack of political education as to, like, what we're trying to do with all of the other projects that we're into. And that's not coming after the people who are engaged in that work. It's just like it's not reaching as many people as it needs to, in the sense of, like, understanding what we're doing. Um, and there's a bunch of people, which is like the oldest, like, group in like leftist history, is that is just being able to critique, and critique is fine, like, but just because something is not, actively, in the most immediate and direct sense, radical Leninist insurrectionary like policy or politics, doesn't mean that it's not an important development of the power and consciousness of the working class. And that's something that really frustrates me a lot, as somebody who spends a lot of time reading Lenin. I mean, hell. I can't tell if it's back or not. So I'm just going to sort of wait here until. Okay, we're back. Um, all right. Sorry about that. I don't know where I got cut off. Damn, it feels I can't. It's like hard to get back into that state again. Lord. Um. Okay, sounds back now. I was impassioned. That's sad. Um, what I was saying is that, just briefly, is that we're at a moment where I think a lot of people are not recognizing. I was saying that like there's certainly divides across the U.S. left and the online left and whatever, and I think the quickest way to alleviate yourself of like the major worries around that, or just to get involved in a socialist organization, I would suggest the DSA in your community, right? Because then a lot of the stupid debates that you see online, they disappear because they're immaterial. I mean, it's just people yelling at each other, and you can yell about anything. Um, but if I were to give it like a ideological critique, it's like I was saying I get frustrated at a certain kind of like radical who paints themselves in the in the kind of radical trappings of the radical like trappings and like garb of like Lenin or like communism, and they refuse to do any of the kind of investigation into what those figures represented or writing about. I think a really helpful thing to do is to look at Lenin, and I was just saying like I'm not one of these guys who's like worked up about these people. Like I have a bust of Lenin on my desk. I've spent a lot of time studying these folks, and um, it's really critical to look at what they were doing, for example, in the first Russian Revolution, right? In when they created the Duma, right? When they created a kind of managed system of democracy in that country that was run by the bourgeoisie, that was nowhere near a workers' democracy, right? But it was a weakening of the czar's power. um, did Lenin sit around and say, "No, this is not like the true workers' revolution. We're going to sit this one out"? No, they participated in it to show the incapability of the liberal bourgeois system from being able um, to achieve the promises that they were making. Right? Um, they were showing that these promises of freedom and equality that we have out there, that you're putting out there, that you're saying we're going to have a democracy, we're going to have freedom, we're going to have equality, we're going to have democracy. Those are impossible in a system of wage slavery, extraction, and imperialism. Right? We are going to show that this system has extreme limitations, and they end up winning that critique because you see a radical break and a socialist revolution in that country that changed the world. Right? That was their script in these kind of moments where you know though they were not as organized as they could have been. They didn't have anything close to state power or really even a voting bloc. It wasn't just to sit out and be like, well, this is wrong, and we're just going to like wail about purity. It was bringing a critique to the people within the arguments that were being made popular at the time. And I think there's a lot of people who paint themselves in red and don't engage with these kind of historical developments of these movements and these parties. um, well, let me see. um, Sorry for being muted, though. I don't think that was as strong as the first one. I hit my cord, is what happened when I reached for my Lenin bust. um, all right, let's see. There we go. Appreciate the compliment. You can put more compliments in there, y'all. Um, Well, that's the moment that we're in right now. I feel like nobody's stepped up to the plate to give the people who supported Bernie a new objective or pursuit, something to strive for. But it's like certainly in the sense of there's no there we are like waiting for some kind of national or even regional leader at this point, and we don't have it. But it's also leader of what, and I think that there's a lot of focus on like the leadership or the person or the historical figure. But Debs, Lenin, like all of these really critical characters, they were people who answered the historical call, but they answered the call of movements that were being seen. And I think, we're building something there right now, but we're waiting for Godot. Like we're waiting for um this thing that will not happen until we make the conditions to make it happen, right? And what I mean by that is like increasing our organization, increasing our membership. Like, there's a lot of debates about what the socialist left is, right? And I think a lot of them are quite hysterical in the sense that they're just set up to sort of demobilize people, to get folks to, you say like, oh, well, it's just upper middle class people, and I think that that's not really true. um, but as a social base, I do think that does speak to a kind of regional and local disorganization. I think people have a hard time seeing themselves as a member of some kind of historical class. And like, not to be, nerdy or anything like that, but like, what's the line? The Hegel line, right? Like the owl of Minerva, flies um, at dusk, right? And, we need to, like, you'll never understand the historical moment until afterwards. But we need to start doing the kind of work to understand what the social classes that we can be building towards the socialist movement are in this country, and starting to build it. Because it's like, with Bernie, we had a really exceptional moment where there was somebody who was able to speak to a lot of people. But really categorizing what the Bernie moment or movement was, I think, it eludes us a little bit. And I think being able to build a kind of coherent political movement and thing for somebody to be a leader of is really our task, more than saying like, how can we recruit like the perfect orator and speaker? Like that's really the task that's in front of us right now, I would argue. Um, yeah, my Lenin bus was muting my mic, ending the freedom of the press. Yes, I definitely do. Do you think the term "tanky" hurts the discourse? I think that's a shitty word. It means nothing, and it's hurled by our opponents to mean absolutely everything. And I think that, like, I'm not one of these people who thinks that it's worthwhile to like lie, and to romanticize past projects, but I also don't think that it's worthwhile to cut ourselves off from them. What I mean by that is like, I love Richard Wolff has a great line on like the Soviet Union, for example. It's like, if we're living under socialism someday, we'll look fondly at that as an attempt to do something that had never been done before, right? And I think that that's a tradition that we can sort of participate in, right? Where it's not just needlessly, um, romantic and immaterial in that sense, but also recognizing that there is a tradition here, and we can criticize that tradition and learn from things that we don't want to see repeated ever again. Um, I think that it's worthwhile to do that. And I think just coming in 2022, and throwing aspersions at any kind of political project that might, for example, be, because what do people mean more often than not when they're talking about tankies? It's mainly, it's like people who are against U.S. imperialism, and a lot of those people um, have gotten really really weird, and I think there's some people who are attracted to it for like the contrarianism of it rather than like the basis of it. But I think the vast majority of people who are really engaged in that work in a serious way are well-spirited people trying to fight for a better world. And I find terms like tanky to be, one, just inaccurate, but unhelpful, in the sense that it dehumanizes and puts division between folks. It doesn't really mean anything of value, in my opinion, in the contemporary sense today. And it also it expresses a really unhelpful tendency in, I think, a lot of American leftists, um, like tendencies to think about politics as, where would I have been in 1917 if I was in Russia? Who would I have been when Rosa Luxemburg was rising up against the state, right? People are trying to put themselves into different historical moments, and it's just like, you wouldn't have been there, right? It's not helpful to only to think about yourself in these kind of overarching historical narratives, because first of all, no one consciously is interacting in this moment in that way, and it gets yourself into these just kind of like bizarre, fantastical traps. And it's like, it's not that like studying history isn't important, and even being like, oh, these are the good guys, or I support these guys in this sense, but this kind of like ego project that a lot of people get into is like, oh, I would have been one of the really good guys in history instead of one of the really stupid bad guys. I think is a really unhelpful reward system to create for yourself, when you should be really learning like what happened, why was it happening, what were the material forces that allowed this to happen, what could have happened at that moment, what couldn't have happened. Like, that's how you should be reading history as a socialist, if your goal is to arm yourself with knowledge, not doing some kind of bizarre internal fanfic with yourself. Um, well, I appreciate all of y'all too. Um, yeah, I mean, the intervention stuff has been super sad. Um, well, it's just like, what do they want? What do they want to happen? I think there's a very fair critique. I think that not taking that movement and turning it into something actually material. I think it would have been great if, for example, Bernie said, "Hey, all these people who love like this message that I was spreading, join this organization, the Democratic Socialists of America." I mean, he already came out and said he was a Democratic Socialist time and time again. I think that's a real mistake. Because I'm sorry, like, I know people do good organizing work, and they're fine, but our revolution as an organization is nowhere near a kind of party structure that's unique, right? It's a nice progressive organization, and it can be very helpful in raising awareness and money. But we need something much, much bigger than that. And I think it's too bad that that's what Bernie built out of 16 and out of 28. Like, yeah, I think there's definitely criticisms to be made there, but the what people wanted from him was, again, it was the same kind of like just personal psychic enjoyment from seeing Bernie Sanders, you know, flip out and Biden publicly or something like that. I think that that's really unhelpful. Um, like, there's some guys online who are who are goofy, who do this kind of thing. There's also like a guy, I don't know if you ever seen him, who's like a white guy who's like a big supporter of like imperial fascist Japan, right? There's always going to be some weirdo out there looking for attention to like take psychotic positions. But I think as a real political tendency, I can't tell you right now that I think that the biggest problem with the American left is that people are too committed to the international proletarian revolution and Daddy Stalin, right? Like, that is not the situation that we are in. If that was the case, then we could have real conversations about that. But functionally is not, um, and that's essentially what it is now. And the worst thing is now they're doing um, that is that's essentially, Tankie is a term for leftists you don't like, is true. Leninism proposes a dictatorship of the proletariat. Well, that's actually a line from Marx, led by the Revolutionary Vanguard Party as a political prelude to the establishment of communism. How is that helping? Well, what does the term dictatorship of the proletariat mean? You can only understand these things dialectically in the sense of, what is the current state? The current state is what is called the dictatorship of the bosses, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. And in that sense, this entire system, from our legal system to our economic system to the way our government functions, is set up to protect the power of the American ruling class, the American bourgeoisie. You will see that really express itself if there is ever a successful movement in this country politically. to start really trying to redistribute wealth and redistribute power in this society, because immediately the organs of reaction will rise up against it. And by that, I mean the Supreme Court, right? You think for a second that the Supreme Court, if Bernie Sanders came into power, was going to let Medicare for all through? No, we were going to have a fight against that reactionary arm of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. You see it right now when the popular vote is not respected in this country. That is a system that was designed to protect the property owners who own people, right? That is the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, right? The entire system from the Senate, having Senate control of our democracy effectively, right, which drives its power not from people, right, which is a democracy is supposed to represent, but from a kind of bizarre fiefdom called the state. That is a system that is designed to protect the power of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. So by the dictatorship of the proletariat, what they mean by that is the eradication of those systems that protect the powerful in favor of systems that protect the working people, with the goal of eradicating the need for those things having to exist in the first place, right? I think that there's no other term, I think, in kind of socialist Marxist discourse that is so misunderstood by folks than by the term dictatorship of the proletariat. Um, let's see. Hmm. Um, Let me see. I'm coming down to catch up with the modern chat, because what? I'm like 4 minutes behind you. I'm coming back. Yeah, I think that would have been a very good thing. I don't want to send y'all to whoever this guy is, Kowalski. He's like, it's actually bad. It's like it's super reactionary garbage. I was just saying that I've seen that on the internet. There's just a weird guy who would defend everything out there. Um, I don't want to get into YouTuber thing, but the Hinkle thing. I mean, I don't find that guy to really be representative of like of a communist or Marxist in any of the arguments that they're making. So I think using the term tanky to them is is incorrect as well. Um, For sure, I think this is the case, and I think that's also okay. Like, do you think a lot of leftists are trying to prove themselves? Emo Giant says to be the left of Bernie. It seems like it to me, and like it's fine to be to the left of Bernie. In fact, like I would consider myself and a lot of members, people who are watching this, to be at the left. I mean, there was a wall with Bernie, and I think he was extremely radical, and particularly he was much more motivated by the material, and I think that's like the real distinction that a lot of people I think need to learn, and a lesson that the left needs to learn, is that like for most people politics is about self-expression, right? If you were sitting here and you had the buttons to do this or that, which ones would you press, right? And it's a very fun game to play. Look, I love grand historical video games and shit like that too. What would I have done if I was ruling this country or that country at this period of time, right? It's very fun. I'll have a debate with you on it. I'll talk about it. But I understand that that's like an intellectual exercise for me, or that's like a fun activity for me. That's not an expression of politics. Politics is about being a member of a community and creating the conditions to have your demands met. Right? Having political conviction comes into that play, but that's the smallest and most individual level of that kind of that process. And for so many people, because we're extremely alienated, because we are disorganized, and we live in a highly individualized society, most people only see politics as a space for them to express the things that they've thought about in their time on Earth, right? Which again is fine. I do it all the time. I'm doing it right now. But you make a mistake when you think that is like what politics, so posturing to be more to the left than somebody, or this or that, right? Very unhelpful if your goal is to end systems that don't give a shit. Um, if you believe in them or not, right? That's like the thing. This is like, we did a great episode on Left Reckoning recently, Matt and I, on Marx's critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, and in it Marx is criticizing the idealists, who think that just by making a critique of of society, particularly you know, forms of Christianity, that the conditions that made Christianity a dominant narrative in their society would wither away. When Marx says, no, it's the conditions that create the need for this kind of reactionary Christianity in our society. And if you want to end that system, you need to focus on doing politics to change, you know, the actual economic reality that produces these, right? And if you're sitting around thinking about, I'm more to the left of this person, or I would have been on this side or that side, you're doing a form of idealism where you're just thinking it starts here and it goes out there, when the opposite is true. And I think it's a lesson that needs to be learned very, very quickly by folks. Um, this is very true. Um, how's it going, y'all? I'll tell you. I just got to say, I didn't watch the thing with Cedar and him. I put it on for 1 second, and I actually just got like overcome with like a feeling of depression. Because it wasn't even, there was no debate going on. They're just sort of back and forth. I don't know. I don't like that stuff. I try to play that game. I can't. It's too much. It's too complicated. It probably would be fun, but I can't. I'm not gonna read a book to learn how to play a video game. I'm sorry. I just cannot do it. I'm not there. I'd rather play guitar or grill or do something else. Um, I'm coming down to see where y'all are at. I might be rolling in a second. Do I think that Bernie has a public position and a private position? Um, I I think Bernie definitely had a period of time where he was probably more radical. I think that Bernie, not, I mean, that'd be it's an interesting question. The only reason I'm sort of dancing around right now is because I'm not confirmed. I mean, I do think that like he definitely has ideas and plans beyond sort of what he's doing when he's doing a CNN town hall, and they're not sinister. He's quite clear about it. He wants to create a society where working people have a say, where working people don't have to be hungry, where working people can you know can you know, go to the doctor when they need to. But he was very clear, and I think this has really showed that Bernie still is thinking as a socialist, even if he might not be you know, doing the red flag stuff, when he was saying that we would need to have mass social movements to make sure that we could overcome the reactionary parts of the state that were going to prevent his platform from going through. Right. I think that showed, you know, Bernie as a political thinker, you know, still very much is thinking in the sense of class conflict and class war. Um, but I would say probably in general, I don't think Bernie is hiding his opinion on anything, and he doesn't seem to be the character to do that. But I think that he might have not highlighted certain things over others. Um, um, what tuning do I use on guitar? I mean, I use them. I use them all as you're supposed to. I don't use that. Um, I mainly am in open tuning or drop D or something like that. I mean, I play mostly country and bluegrass stuff. So, yeah, I play guitar. I play a little banjo too. um, yeah, this was pretty good. And I think that was the, I think, you know, one of the difficult things about the 2020 campaign is I think a lot got lost of his kind of radical nature, and I think part of that was the pandemic. I think part of that was the kind of strategy there. I think it was I think the 2020 campaign, unfortunately, was other than that first little bit, it unraveled pretty quickly, and unraveled for sure because of the collaboration of the Democratic Party against him. But um, would have been 2020, I think, was not as radical, unfortunately, as 16. But I don't know. Um, did I write the music for the show? No, that's Christoph Brun. You should check out their work. He put in all the music together for the show, which I'm a big fan of. Um, Maybe one day we could do a couple bars. Matt used to play electric guitar too. I always try to. I'd be curious to hear how he played. Um, you have to have a conqueror mindset. I mean, conquering. You got to start conquering, cleaning your room or something first, man. You can't. You can't do it. I mean, I'm not above spending a lot of time playing a video game, but I can't sit around and read a bunch of explainer modules to do every single thing. Like anytime I try to do any part of that game, you go online, you be like, okay, how do you move your army? How do you do this? And then it'll be like quick explanation of how to move your army on Hearts of Iron 4, 50 minutes. Absolutely not. I'm not going to do that shit. No, thank you. Um, you can't be doing that. We gotta be doing better. I know Sean from Antifada plays a lot of it, or one of the other games. Was it that's not Praxis. I like the other games. I play King's Crusaders. I'd be more interested in playing Hearts of Iron or the other ones, but the engines are too complicated for me. I'd agree with that. Bernie's been at this longer than most have been alive. He's put a lot of effort in moving socialism. The effort he's put into moving socialism is legendary. People that say him are kind of lame. I'd agree with that. I mean, it's just like people have a hard time like having a critique of anything without it being a complete repudiation of the person, and I think that that's a really unhelpful lesson. No, we love you, Billy Bricks. I appreciate you being in the chat. I'm just having fun. Um, I mean, Red Dead Redemption is one of my favorite games of all time, and um, I'm not even saying uh, just because it's like cowboy and western. I mean, that was probably one of the most delightful games I've ever played. Because it like had a great story, and it had the sandbox thing, but like too many games I think are too sandbox focused, right? I like to have a little bit of structure. Um, those guys are much better than me. Those guys are the guys at TIR. This is Revolution. I mean, those guys are musicians. Dude, learn a Travis pick if you don't know. That's one of the stronger. That's a really great way to learn how to play. Red Dead 1's a lot of fun, but I think you got it. Like maybe you could set Red Dead 1 in with the Red Dead 2 engine. I'd be really happy to play that. The best bit of Red Dead 1 is the end. When you get surrounded by that whole army of boys, and it goes into a combat mechanism, and usually like in video games, if you're going to die in the video game, it like just does it as a cutscene, but it actually makes you like shoot out at them, and you get one last gun draw. I mean, that was epic. I mean, those stories were just so good. All right, y'all. um I'm smelling the chili, which I hope is not a bad thing, actually. So I got to run. I'll see y'all. I'll see patrons on Sunday um, for a bonus episode. Just Matt and I this week. Next week we got a lot coming to y'all. So keep your eye out. I know we got Andrew Hairston. Um, we'll be releasing that interview, and we also have some really exciting stuff coming from Colorado. So all of our Colorado peeps, be sure to tune in next week. And I guess we'll be back on Tuesday next week as well. But until then, take care.